Zanira was just 8 years old when her world shattered. Her mother, the gentle and loving first wife of Chief Maleko, fell ill and passed away suddenly. The entire village mourned, but no one felt the loss more than little Zanira. She clung to her father, hoping that his warmth would fill the emptiness left by her mother's absence. But grief is a strange thing. It makes some people softer, while it hardens others. Chief Maleko, desperate to move forward, made a decision that would change Zanira's life forever. Within months, a new woman entered their home. Her name was Nadira. She was breathtakingly beautiful, with smooth, dark skin and piercing eyes that held secrets no one dared to uncover. She walked into the chief's home with the grace of a queen, her presence demanding attention. The villagers whispered among themselves, uneasy with how quickly she had replaced Zanira's mother. But Maleko was blinded by her charm. He believed he had found a woman who could bring joy back into their household. At first, Nadira played the role of a caring stepmother. She would smile sweetly at Zanira in front of the chief, brush her hair, and speak in a honeyed voice. But when Maleko wasn't looking, that warmth disappeared like mist in the morning sun. Her eyes, once filled with kindness, turned cold and sharp. Her smiles became smirks. The little girl who had already lost so much would soon lose even more. Zanira was not a foolish child. She could feel the change in the air, like the sky darkening before a storm. Nadira never touched her with affection anymore. Instead, she found small ways to make her suffer. Her food portions grew smaller. Her soft bed was replaced with a mat on the cold floor. Her toys mysteriously disappeared. At first, Zanira tried to tell her father, but each time she spoke, Nadira's lies were quicker than the truth. "Oh, Maleko," Nadira would sigh dramatically, tears welling up in her eyes. "Zanira is just struggling to accept me. I try my best, but she refuses to love me." And just like that, Maleko believed her. He looked at his daughter with disappointment, thinking she was ungrateful. Nadira had successfully driven a wedge between them, and Zanira found herself lonelier than ever. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The cruelty became worse. Nadira didn't just want Zanira out of her way, she wanted her completely broken. When Maleko was away, the real torment began. "Your father loves me now," Nadira whispered one night, crouching beside Zanira's mat. You're nothing but a shadow of a dead woman, and soon you will be forgotten just like her." Zanira squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself not to cry. She wouldn't give Nadira the satisfaction, but inside, she felt herself breaking. She was just a little girl, desperate for love, but all she received was cruelty. Then, Lusana was born, Nadira's daughter, a perfect little baby with her mother's beauty and her father's name. The moment Lusana came into the world, Nadira's power in the household solidified. Maleko doted on the child, oblivious to the darkness growing in his own home. Zanira, once the beloved daughter of the chief, had become nothing more than an unwanted burden. One evening, as the village prepared for a grand feast, Zanira approached her father, hoping for even a moment of his attention. She reached for his hand, her small fingers trembling. "Father," she whispered, "do you still love me?" But before Maleko could answer, Nadira's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Zanira, get back inside and clean the floors. Now." And just like that, Maleko turned away, laughing with his friends, as if he hadn't heard her at all. That night, as Zanira scrubbed the cold, hard floors of the house she once called home, she realized something chilling. Her stepmother wasn't just cruel, she was dangerous, and she was just getting started. Zanira's life turned into a never-ending nightmare. She was no longer treated as the daughter of a powerful chief. She was nothing more than a servant in her own home. Nadira made sure of that. Each morning, before the sun even touched the sky, Zanira was forced out of bed. The cold floor beneath her mat sent shivers through her small body, but she had no choice. Nadira's sharp voice would slice through the silence, ordering her to fetch water, sweep the compound, and prepare breakfast. All while Lusana, her stepmother's precious daughter, slept peacefully in a bed covered in soft blanket. At first, Zanira thought if she worked hard enough, if she obeyed without question, maybe Nadira would show her a sliver of kindness. Maybe, just maybe, her father would notice her suffering. But hope was a cruel thing. It made you believe in something that would never come. The abuse was relentless. If Zanira made even the smallest mistake, Nadira's fury would rain down upon her like a storm. A missed spot on the floor, a slap across the face, a dish left with a speck of dirt, no food for the entire day. Some nights, Her stomach twisted in hunger as she watched Lusana eat the finest meals, her little hands grabbing the best meat while Zanira was forced to chew on dry scraps. "Why do you look at my daughter like that?" Nadira sneered one evening, catching Zanira staring at Lusana's plate. "You think you deserve the same as her? You are nothing, do you hear me? Nothing." Tears welled up in Zanira's eyes, but she swallowed them down. Crying only made things worse. Instead, she kept her head low and did as she was told. She learned to survive in silence. The villagers began to notice the change. They whispered among themselves, wondering why the once happy, well-dressed daughter of Chief Maleko now looked like a shadow of herself. Her clothes were torn, her feet bare and covered in dust, her body thin from lack of food. Some felt pity, but no one dared to question Nadira. She was the chief's wife now, and her beauty masked the cruelty that lurked beneath. Even Maleko, the one person who should have protected Zanira, seemed blind to her suffering. Whenever he was around, Nadira transformed into the perfect wife and mother. She would place Lusana in his arms, shower him with sweet words, and laugh as if their family was whole. And if Zanira tried to speak, Nadira's sharp nails would dig into her arm, a silent warning that kept her lips sealed. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and before long, years passed. Zanira grew, but so did her misery. She was no longer a little girl. She was a young woman forced into a life of servitude. Her hands, once soft and delicate, were now rough and bruised from endless labor. Her back ached, her spirit withered, but she refused to break. Deep inside, buried beneath all the pain, a fire still burned. And though Nadira thought she had completely crushed her stepdaughter, she had no idea. Zanira's suffering would not last forever. One day, the tides would turn, and the same hands that were forced to scrub the floors would soon rise in strength. The girl she tried to destroy would become the very thing she feared most. The night was silent, the air thick with the weight of something terrible waiting to happen. The village slept peacefully, but inside Chief Maleko's household, a storm was brewing. Zanira had made a mistake that night, one she didn't even realize she had made. She had accidentally spilled a small bowl of soup while serving Lusana. A mere accident, a moment of clumsiness. But to Nadira, it was an unforgivable crime. The moment the soup hit the floor, time seemed to stop. Lusana gasped dramatically, pulling back as if Zanira had poured boiling water on her, instead of just splashing a few drops. Nadira's face twisted with rage, her sharp eyes locking onto the girl she had spent years tormenting. The room fell into a dangerous silence, and in that moment, Zanira knew tonight would be different. Before she could run, before she could even beg, Nadira grabbed her by the wrist, her nails digging into Zanira's fragile skin. "You ungrateful wretch!" she hissed, her voice so full of venom it sent shivers down Zanira's spine. She yanked her towards the back of the house, towards the small, dark hut where no one would hear the screams. Zanira fought. She clawed at the ground, at the doorframe, at anything she could hold on to, but Nadira was stronger. Fueled by years of hatred, she dragged the girl inside, slamming the door shut behind them. The only light in the hut came from a single flickering oil lamp, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The smell of damp earth filled the air, mixing with the sickening scent of fear. "Hold still!" Nadira spat, shoving Zanira onto the cold floor. Before she could move, before she could scream for help, rough ropes wrapped around her wrists and ankles, binding her down. Panic clawed at her chest. She thrashed, desperate to break free, but it was useless. Then, Nadira knelt beside her, a twisted smile stretching across her face. She held up a small sharp blade, the dim light glinting off its metal edge. "You think you're strong, don't you?" Nadira whispered, her voice almost gentle. "You think you can endure anything?" Zanira's breath came in short, panicked gasps. She shook her head, pleading with wide, terrified eyes. But Nadira wasn't looking for mercy. She was looking for pain. The first nail was the worst. A sharp, searing pain shot through Zanira's entire body as Nadira dug the blade beneath her thumbnail, prying it upwards. The sensation was unbearable. Fire, ice, agony, all at once. Zanira's scream tore through the night, but no one came. No one ever came. Nadira's expression never changed. She moved to the next nail, and then the next. Each time, Zanira's body convulsed with pain, tears streaming down her face, her vision blurring. "Now," Nadira said after the last nail was gone, her voice dripping with satisfaction, "maybe you'll finally understand your place." Zanira barely heard her. Her mind was lost in a haze of suffering, her body trembling violently. The pain was unbearable, but even through it, something deeper burned inside her. A fire, a hatred, a promise. Nadira thought she had broken her, but what she had really done was create something far more dangerous. The night was cold, the wind whispering through the trees like ghosts murmuring secrets. Zanira lay on the hard ground of the hut, her body limp, her fingers throbbing with unbearable pain. The blood from her torn nails had dried into dark stains on her hands, her skin pale from the torment she had endured. She could barely move, barely think. Every breath felt like a struggle, but she was still alive, and that was something Nadira could not allow. The wicked woman stood over her, arms crossed, a look of disgust twisting her beautiful face. She had expected Zanira to break completely, to give up and die right there on the floor, but even in her agony, Zanira had refused to let go of life. Her eyes still held something Nadira hated, defiance. "Take her," Nadira snapped to the two guards standing by the door. "Get rid of her. Make sure she never finds her way back." The guards hesitated. Even they, cruel as they were, shifted uncomfortably. The girl was barely breathing, her small frame trembling with weakness. They knew what it meant to be abandoned in the forest at night. No one ever returned. But Nadira's glare was sharper than any blade. They had no choice. Rough hands grabbed Zanira, dragging her up like a sack of old grain. She wanted to fight, wanted to scream, but her strength was gone. Her head lolled to the side, her vision swimming with shadows as they carried her out into the night. The journey was long, the air growing colder with each step. The sound of the village faded, replaced by the eerie silence of the wilderness. The trees loomed tall and menacing, their twisted branches clawing at the sky. Owls hooted in the distance, and somewhere far off, the chilling howl of a wild beast echoed through the darkness. Zanira could barely keep her eyes open. Her body swung limply between the guards as they trudged deeper into the unknown. She felt the rough bark of a tree against her back as they threw her down carelessly, like discarded trash. The impact sent fresh pain through her body, but she barely flinched. "Stay here," one of the guards muttered. "If you're lucky, the wild animals will finish you quickly." They turned and left without another word, their footsteps fading into nothing. Zanira lay there, staring up at the sky, the stars blinking down at her like distant watchers of her fate. Her breath came in short, painful gasps, her body screaming for rest, for warmth, for kindness, things she had been denied for so long. The forest was alive with movement, with creatures lurking in the shadows, waiting. She was alone, she was dying, and yet something deep inside her refused to surrender. Nadira thought this was the end. She believed she had erased Zanira from existence, wiped her away like dust from a table. But the woman had underestimated her. Zanira had survived too much, endured too much, and even as her body lay broken in the heart of the forest, her soul whispered one thing, over and over again. She would not die here. She would return. The night was long, cold, and unforgiving. The wind howled through the trees, whispering through the leaves like unseen spirits. Zanira lay motionless on the damp forest floor, her body weak, her hands covered in dried blood. She had no strength left to cry, no voice left to scream. The pain had settled deep inside her, a part of her now, like a shadow that refused to leave. The sounds of the night grew louder, the rustling of bushes, the hoots of owls, the distant growl of something hunting in the darkness. She was barely aware of it all. Her mind drifted between sleep and wakefulness, between life and death. Then soft footsteps, slow, careful, moving closer. A figure emerged from the trees, her silhouette barely visible in the dim moonlight. An old woman, her back slightly bent with age, but her presence strong, powerful. She carried a wooden staff, and a thick cloth was wrapped around her shoulders to shield her from the night's cold. Her sharp eyes scanned the ground until they landed on the broken girl lying before her. She sighed. "So, fate has led you to me," the woman murmured. With surprising strength, she bent down, her rough hands gently touching Zanira's face. The girl's skin was burning with fever, her breath weak, but she was alive. The old woman knew what she had to do. She lifted Zanira, cradling her as if she weighed nothing. Slowly, she made her way through the forest, stepping over roots and stones with practiced ease. The journey was long, but she never stopped. Her grip never loosened. By the time they reached a small hut, hidden deep in the trees, the sky was beginning to lighten. A fire burned inside, casting a warm glow. The old woman laid Zanira down on a mat, covering her with soft animal skins. Then, without hesitation, she began her work. She crushed herbs with steady hands, mixing them into a thick paste. She placed the medicine on Zanira's wounds, her touch gentle, her eyes full of knowledge. She whispered words, old words, words of power and healing passed down for generations. For days, Zanira drifted in and out of sleep, fever consuming her. She dreamed of fire, of screams, of pain that never ended. But each time she awoke, she found the old woman by her side, spooning warm broth into her mouth, wiping the sweat from her forehead, whispering that she would survive. And she did. Slowly, her strength returned. The pain in her hands lessened. The fever broke. The day she sat up on her own, the old woman smiled, her eyes filled with something strange. Pride. "You are stronger than they thought," she said. "Stronger than even you know." Zanira stared at her, confusion in her tired eyes. "Who are you?" she whispered. The woman chuckled, stirring a pot of herbs over the fire. "I am Mama Kweli. I have been waiting for you." Zanira frowned. "Waiting?" Mama Kweli nodded, her eyes filled with wisdom. "Fate does not make mistakes, child. You were not meant to die in that forest. You were meant for something greater." Zanira's heart pounded. The words sent a shiver through her, not of fear, but of something else, something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Under Mama Kweli's care, Zanira's body healed, but something even deeper was changing within her. She was no longer the weak, broken girl who had been left to die in the forest. Slowly, she was becoming someone new, someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who would never be a victim again. Mama Kweli was more than a healer. She was a teacher, a guide, and a force of nature. From the moment Zanira could stand on her own, the old woman wasted no time. "You have survived, but survival is not enough," Mama Kweli told her one morning as she handed her a small knife. "Now, you must learn how to fight." At first, Zanira hesitated. Her hands still trembled from the wounds she had suffered, but Mama Kweli was patient. She taught her how to hold a weapon, how to move, how to read her enemy's steps before they even made them. The forest became her training ground, the trees her silent witnesses. She learned to fight with her fists, with sticks, with anything she could find. Every strike, every dodge, every lesson carved strength into her bones. But it wasn't just about fighting. Mama Kweli also opened Zanira's eyes to the secrets of the earth. She taught her how to recognize the plants that healed and the ones that killed, how to mix herbs into powerful medicines, how to listen to the whispers of nature and understand its warnings. "The world speaks, child," Mama Kweli would say. "You just have to learn how to listen." And Zanira did. She learned the ways of the healers, the warriors, and the wise. She studied late into the night, memorizing every leaf, every root, every potion. The pain of her past fueled her, pushing her forward. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Mama Kweli placed a bowl of water before her. "Look," she commanded. Zanira stared into the water, expecting to see her reflection, the same weak girl she had always been. But the face staring back at her was different. Her eyes were sharper, her posture stronger. There was a fire inside her now, one that no one could ever put out again. "You are ready," Mama Kweli said with a nod. Zanira looked up, gripping the small dagger in her hands. "For what?" she asked. Mama Kweli smiled knowingly. "For whatever comes next." The kingdom buzzed with excitement. Drums echoed through the air, laughter filled the streets, and colorful fabrics danced in the wind. The grand festival was a day of celebration, where the most powerful and noble families gathered to feast, sing, and display their wealth. The marketplace overflowed with traders. The palace shone under the golden sun, and people from every corner of the land arrived to witness the spectacle. Among the crowd, whispers spread like wildfire. A stranger had entered the kingdom, a woman of breathtaking beauty and undeniable presence. She walked with grace, her golden brown skin glowing under the sunlight, her long braided hair adorned with beads that clinked softly as she moved. She was dressed in the finest silk, her jewelry glinting like tiny stars. But it wasn't just her appearance that captured attention. It was her aura, the quiet strength in her posture, the way her piercing eyes seemed to look straight into one's soul. People turned, stared, and murmured, "Who is she? She walks like royalty. But I do not know her. Have we seen her before? At the palace, Chief Maleko and his wife Nadira sat on their thrones, watching the festival unfold. Nadira was dressed in her richest garments, her sharp eyes scanning the crowd with satisfaction. Beside her, Lusana, now a grown woman, basked in the admiration of suitors. To them, life was perfect. They had erased all memory of the weak, broken girl they had once cast away, until the stranger stepped forward. The drums stopped, the laughter faded. A hush fell over the gathering as the woman walked towards the high table where the rulers sat. Every step was deliberate, powerful. Her presence commanded attention. Nadira's smile faltered. Chief Maleko narrowed his eyes. Something about her, something unsettling. Then, the woman spoke, her voice calm yet firm, carrying the weight of the past and the power of the present. "It has been many years," she said, "but do you not recognize me, Chief Maleko?" A shiver ran through the air. The chief's face darkened, his hands gripping the arms of his throne. Nadira's breath caught in her throat, because now, up close, they could see it. The shape of her face, the fire in her eyes, the strength in her stance. Zanira, the girl they had abandoned, the girl they had destroyed, the girl they had left to die. But she had returned, and she was nothing like the weak, helpless child they had once tormented. Gasps rippled through the crowd, like a wave crashing against the shore. People leaned in, whispering in disbelief, their eyes darting between the powerful woman standing before them and the chief's wife, whose face had turned pale as ash. Nadira clutched the edge of her seat, her fingers digging into the fabric as if trying to hold on to the last threads of her crumbling power. Zanira took a step forward, her gaze locked on her father, Chief Maleko, the man who had once been her protector but had abandoned her without a second thought. He shifted uncomfortably under her stare, but he said nothing. "I was a child," Zanira's voice rang out, strong and unwavering. "A child who had just lost her mother. A child who only wanted love, but instead I was given cruelty." Murmurs swelled in the crowd. Some people frowned, their minds racing to piece together the story. Others already knew. The servants, the villagers, those who had seen glimpses of Nadira's wickedness, but had stayed silent out of fear. Zanira reached for the golden bracelets on her wrist and slid them off one by one. Then, she raised her hands for everyone to see. The crowd gasped. Deep scars ran across her fingers, ugly, twisted reminders of the night of horror. Women in the crowd covered their mouths in shock. Even the bravest men turned away, unable to stomach the sight. "Nadira did this to me," Zanira declared, her voice laced with both pain and power. "She pulled my nails out one by one just to see me suffer, just to break me." All eyes darted to Nadira. She shook her head frantically, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow. "Lies! This is madness! Who would believe such a tale?" But before she could spew more words, Zanira lifted a small pendant from her neck. It gleamed under the sunlight, a tiny, simple thing, and yet it held the weight of truth. "This belonged to my mother," Zanira said. "The night I was taken to the forest, Nadira ripped it from my neck and threw it away like trash. But fate is not kind to the wicked. A loyal servant found it and kept it all these years, waiting for the day justice would be served." A hush fell over the crowd. The pendant was unmistakable. It had once belonged to Chief Maleko's first wife, the woman he had loved, the woman Nadira had worked so hard to erase from memory. The chief's eyes widened in realization. He looked at Nadira, and for the first time in years, doubt flickered in his gaze. "Nadira," his voice was cold, sharp. "Is this true?" She stammered, shaking her head. "Of course not. Why would I harm my own stepdaughter?" But then another voice spoke up from the crowd. An old woman, a former servant in the palace, stepped forward. "She speaks the truth," the woman said, her voice trembling but firm. "We all saw it. We all knew, but we were too afraid." Another voice joined, then another, and another. One by one, people stepped forward, revealing the hidden cruelty they had witnessed. How Nadira had beaten Zanira, starved her, forced her to sleep on the cold ground while Lusana was treated like a queen. How the young girl had suffered in silence while the entire palace turned a blind eye. Nadira's face twisted in fury. "Lies! All of you! Lies!" She turned to Chief Maleko, desperation in her eyes. "You believe them over me." But it was too late. The truth was out. Chief Maleko rose from his throne, his face dark with shame and anger. "I trusted you, Nadira. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me." The people in the crowd roared in outrage. Some demanded justice, others cursed Nadira's name, and as Nadira looked around, she realized her power, her influence, her carefully crafted life was unraveling before her very eyes. The moment Chief Maleko delivered his judgment, a heavy silence filled the air. The once proud Nadira stood frozen, her hands trembling as the weight of her downfall crashed down on her. The villagers, the servants, the nobles, everyone who had once feared her, now looked at her with disgust. Murmurs turned into whispers, and whispers grew into shouts of anger. "You are no longer welcome here," Chief Maleko's voice thundered. "From this day forward you are banished from this kingdom. Leave and never return." Nadira's heart pounded. Banished. She had ruled this household for years, manipulating and controlling everything to her advantage. And now, she was being thrown away like garbage. "This is a mistake," she cried out, turning to the people. "You all benefited from my rule. You—" A rotten fruit flew through the air and struck her on the shoulder. Then another. The crowd erupted, hurling whatever they could find, fruits, stones, even clumps of dirt. "Witch!" someone shouted. "Monster! This is what you deserve," Nadira shrieked and covered her face, stumbling backward as the people she once ruled turned against her. Lusana, her beloved daughter, tried to step forward, but the look in Chief Maleko's eyes stopped her in her tracks. He wasn't just angry, he was disgusted. "Go, before I let the people decide your fate," he warned. Nadira had no choice. She turned and ran, her once elegant robes now covered in filth, her hair wild and tangled. She didn't know where she was going. All she knew was that she had to escape. She ran past the market, where the same traders she had once insulted now laughed at her. She ran past the riverbank, where women washing clothes pointed and whispered. The shame burned hotter than the midday sun, searing her pride, her arrogance, her very soul. Breathing heavily, she reached the outskirts of the kingdom, where the land was rough and wild. Her fine sandals were long gone, her feet bruised and bloodied. But she kept running, desperate to escape the judgment of the world. Then, suddenly, the ground beneath her gave way. She let out a piercing scream as she tumbled forward, her body crashing down into a deep, hidden pit. Sharp thorns tore through her skin, wrapping around her like nature's revenge. She clawed at the dirt, trying to pull herself up, but the more she struggled, the deeper the thorns dug in. Pain shot through her body, her once beautiful face now covered in cuts and scratches. "No, no, someone help me," she shrieked, but there was no one. The same villagers who had once bowed before her now stood at the edge of the pit, looking down at her with cold, unfeeling eyes. "Karma has finally found you," an old woman said. "She deserves worse," another muttered. Nadira sobbed, her voice breaking into pitiful cries. The pain was unbearable, but the realization that she was truly alone hurt even more. Lusana was nowhere to be seen. The man she had manipulated into marriage had turned his back on her. She had no power, no allies, nothing. The once mighty Nadira had fallen, not by the hands of her enemies, but by the weight of her own evil deeds. Her screams echoed through the trees, but no one came to save her. Justice had been served. The kingdom had never seen a day like this before. The air was thick with anticipation as people gathered in the grand courtyard, their eyes fixed on the woman who had returned from the ashes of her past. Zanira stood tall, her presence commanding respect. She was no longer the frail, broken girl they once knew. She was a woman of strength, wisdom, and resilience. Chief Maleko looked at his daughter, his heart heavy with guilt. He had been blind to her suffering, deceived by the woman he once loved. But now, seeing the scars she bore with pride, he realized the strength she had found in her pain. He stepped forward, his voice breaking with emotion. "My daughter, I failed you," he admitted, bowing his head. "But today, I stand before you, not as a chief, but as a father who seeks your forgiveness." Zanira's eyes softened. She had spent years nursing the wounds of her past, but hatred had no place in her heart anymore. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on her father's shoulder. "The past cannot be changed," she said, her voice steady, "but the future is in our hands." A wave of emotion rippled through the crowd. For years, they had watched in silence as Zanira suffered, too afraid to speak against Nadira's cruelty. But today, they saw the true queen that had risen from the ashes. Zanira turned to the people, her voice clear and strong. "No child in this kingdom will ever suffer the way I did," she declared. "From this day forward, I will ensure that every orphan, every forgotten soul has a place to call home. No one will be cast aside. No one will live in fear. The crowd erupted into cheers. Women wiped their tears. Elders nodded in approval, and children looked at her with admiration. She was no longer just Chief Maleko's daughter. She was a symbol of hope. With her newfound wisdom, Zanira opened a home for abandoned children, ensuring they received love, education, and protection. She used the knowledge she had gained from Mama Kweli to heal the sick and teach others the power of kindness. But her greatest victory was not in power or status. It was in breaking the cycle of pain. She refused to let bitterness consume her, choosing instead to build a future where cruelty would never reign again. As the sun set over the kingdom, Zanira stood on the palace steps, watching as laughter and joy filled the air. She had reclaimed her place, not as a victim, but as a warrior of justice. And for the first time in years, she felt truly free. Imagine a world where kindness triumphs over cruelty, where justice finds its way to those who have suffered, and where no child is left to endure the pain that Zanira once faced. Her journey was filled with suffering, betrayal, and unimaginable cruelty, but she rose above it all. She turned her pain into power, her scars into strength, and her past into a lesson for the world. How many children today are suffering in silence? How many voices are unheard? Zanira's story is not just hers. It is the story of every soul who has been abandoned, mistreated, and cast aside. But she proved that darkness does not last forever, that strength lies within, waiting to rise when the time is right. If this story touched your heart, if you believe in justice, in resilience, in the power of good over evil, then don't let Zanira's message fade away. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Let it be a reminder that no matter how deep the scars, healing is possible. No matter how cruel the world may be, kindness will always shine through. Like this video, share it with your loved ones, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that inspire, teach, and remind us of life's greatest lessons. Thank you for watching, and remember, no pain lasts forever, and no injustice goes unanswered.